Hello, my name is Prodigy, and I'm making a quick video. This is something I've known for a while, and that is that this content creator, Bandwipe, made a video about Flinch about a couple months ago. And the premise of the video is that, quote, Flinch is fake, or it doesn't exist. The secondary premise of the video implies that when you flinch somebody, the reticle automatically goes on target, goes directly to the target. And every once in a while, flinch comes up as sort of like a big controversy because originally in Destiny, I guess I'm going to give you a quick history. Originally in Destiny, flinch was considered something that was like there was too much of it. In fact, at the beginning of Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, people actually complained that there was too much flinch in the game. It was a constant complaint from players that there was too much. However, nearing the end of Destiny 1, there was actually complaints that there was too little flinch because suddenly snipers were really, really good after a bunch of primary nerfs and shotgun nerfs and trials becoming really, really grindy. So flinch is obviously a very, very controversial topic, and it's gone from players thinking it like does not exist at all to it being too much, etc., etc., etc. So, anyways, I've already kind of made a quick time video of his video, so I can go through it sort of frame by frame. I would really like to just draw out what flinch exactly does, because after watching his video, you probably wonder what flinch does and why it works the way it works. And I'm here to tell you how it works, and it's probably going to be surprising to you. So that's what I'm making this video about. Again, I've known this for a while. I'm finally making a video about it, and because it takes a while to make videos and content that's informative, whereas it takes very little time to load a private match and just make a quick 55-second video. So here's his video.
I bet you're wondering why it seems like there's no flinch in Destiny 2. Well, this is the reason. You come around the corner and you're aimed off of somebody and they shoot you without moving anything. Look what happens. Boop. Oh, weird. It got closer to his head. Let me try over here. All right, try again. Oh, what a crazy flinch. I'm gonna aim above his head. Go ahead and shoot me in the face. Oh, let me aim at your chest then. You know, I'm gonna hit a body shot here, and this guy shoots me, flinches me. Oh look, flinches me into the head. You know what? Try again. Doesn't matter where you are, as long as you're aimed in their general direction. If they tag you once, go ahead and shoot. It will flinch onto their head every single time. Why?
See, that's a really, really good question, because that's exactly what this video is going to explain. It's going to explain why. I know he didn't ask it in good faith, but I'm still going to answer it anyways. Now, the first thing you're going to want to notice about this video, and this is obviously the first part, is that flinch doesn't actually go directly to the head. I don't know if he meant to put it that way, or he meant to imply that, but it would seem as if he did. Basically, what I'm going to do is just go through real quick, and I have this open in QuickTime because supposedly QuickTime lets you go frame by frame on a video, or at the very least it'll let me scrub very, very precisely. So let's go here. He's going to aim in. This is him trying to prove his point. Now, he's aiming right there. You see the reticle is sitting right there. And again, I'm going to draw this out in MS Paint so you can kind of know what's going on, because there's a phenomenon going on here that you probably don't notice at first. And I did notice this because I was doing some testing with Drewsky. Okay, so first of all, what I have to point out is flinch is something that occurs over time. It's an overtime mechanic, and if you're looking at it as something that goes from like point A to point B, then you're missing the point of flinch in the game. So the first thing you're going to notice is the reticle actually does flinch off target, and it actually flinches off target quite a bit. This is more than most games actually. Aim punch is usually the term that people use. It actually goes quite a bit off. And why does the reticle deflect so off target? The reason is because in Destiny, the hurt box is really, really big. So if you're going to want to make flinch matter, you're going, as somebody developing the physics engine, you're going to want the reticle to go quite a bit away from where it's shot, or where you're being shot from. And again, for those who don't know, pretty much all gun physics, I keep adjusting the mic so I don't get plosives. Everything, all gun physics occur from the reticle. And if you watch Drewsky's videos, which I'll link in the description, he has a video about cones. I'm not going to describe how cones work because Drewsky already did that. I know he likes to do that every video, but I won't. Because today we're actually going to be talking about cones over time, or hypercones, and it's going to get really, really fun. So you have this reticle over here, and from this is the point where every single cone is generated. Your aim assist cone, your error angle, all that sort of fun stuff. But there's something you probably might notice at this point, and that it's something that Bungie is unique about with their gunplay, is they actually desync the camera from the reticle on a number of occasions. If you notice, the camera in the middle of the screen does not kick with the reticle. The middle of the screen is approximately right here, and the reticle is right here. Now this goes into the sort of phenomenon that a number of players have noticed. Fallout plays who's more neutral on the subject, or who presents it more neutrally, and then you have Bandwipe here who just straight up asks why, which is why I'm using his video, because he very clearly asked a question. Now, if you notice, the reticle deflects all the way up here, which is a huge amount of flinch, a very, very large amount, and it occurs almost instantly. So if you're aiming, you'll feel this. Now, the question is why don't you feel flinch? And I'm going to answer that, and it's going to take quite a while to get to that. Now, the phenomenon he is actually talking about involves this camera desync, and there are two things that happen when you're flinching. There is a sort of accelerated force that applies to the reticle, and what this is called is reticle deflection. In other words, the reticle is deflected from its intended path or its intended position. And again, we're going to talk about a path, or a path is something that occurs over time to a different position. This is reticle deflection. But there is also a linear motion with the camera that occurs, and it goes towards the target. So if you look really, really careful during this flinch event, look how the camera moves. Do you see it? You can kind of see it. If you look at the circle and kind of ignore the reticle, this is why most players probably don't see how this mechanic works. If you just look really closely, look at how the camera instantly, like it just kind of pops. It kind of pops over. Now, how aim punch works in every game is that you have and I'm going to draw this out in a second, you have the reticle that sort of bounces up, and then it returns at a slower rate. So it goes whoop, and then whoop, like that. And that's how it works in every game. This is not unusual. So to put things simply, the reason that the reticle ends up on target is because of this camera split that pushes the reticle towards the target, and the reticle deflection, which pushes it away. Now, you might think that this is like some kind of low, like this is clearly an abomination to shooters. You're putting the reticle on target. But no, it's not really quite like that, because again, this is something that occurs over time. Again, it starts here. It starts right here-ish, and it ends right here-ish. Keep in mind, most guns fire multiple times per second. So, for instance, a 150 hand cannon obviously fires 150 rounds per minute, and it ends up being, I believe, if I get out my calculator here, I know the kill time is 0.8 seconds. 0.8 divided by 3, it's like, yeah, 0.266 seconds. And again, time in this game is measured in ticks, and there are 30 ticks per second. So, I mean, do with that information as you will. Basically, the position of the reticle, as far as the game side or what you don't see, is calculated every tick. So say every single time he shoots, there are You take 0.8 seconds divided by 30, you get 2.66 seconds. Notice it's an uneven number. Whenever there's an uneven number, it'll say like do 2 ticks and then 3 ticks, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, etc. for each shot. That's just kind of how that works in a nutshell. Or 26 ticks. It gets really complicated. Or 26 ticks and then 27, 26, 27. You know, it's complicated. Or actually, no, what would it be? It would be like 8 ticks. The point is it doesn't matter. It's something you can map over time and in abstract. Now, what does like moving the camera mean as far as flinch? And this is the point where I get out MS Paint. I'm gonna try and use red to represent time, and time is the time vector. And for those who don't know, I'm gonna get really deep into physics. By the way, I work in a field that heavily involves physics, and this is kind of going to be a little bit of a physics 101 lesson, but I'm gonna try and draw it out to explain it. So there are 2 mechanics at play. You have your camera flinch. I'm going to draw this out nice and big. There is a limit in MS Paint to how straight I can draw lines and stuff, so bear with me. So you have your camera flinch. We're going to pretend like we're gonna really magnify what's happening there. So you have your camera flinch, which moves in this direction. And again, bear with me on MS Paint. It's kind of eh. And then you have your reticle flinch, which is just this huge thing. And actually, I'm going to Control Z this and give myself more room to draw out what's going on. So your camera flinch here. And then you have your reticle flinch, which I'll use brown for, which goes approximately right here. And this is a very big value. I'm using up the whole entire screen here because compared to the camera flinch, it really is almost, or the camera displacement, the reticle deflection or reticle motion or reticle kick is this really large value. Now I'm going to use these marks here to show sort of what happens over time to give you sort of visualization. So this right here is a very linear motion. It's very smooth. So I'm going to put these as imagine this is a graph, and each one of these is a tick of time. So as you notice, each tick of time is fairly even. The camera, just really smooth motion over to here. Now the reticle kick is completely different, and I'm going to sort of draw these lines across this brown arrow here to show you how it works. Basically the point of this is that there's going to be an acceleration. So what's going to happen is there's this explosive force on something, and in physics this is kind of how force works. And again, Bungie wanted to sort of make something that feels really visceral and realistic. That's pretty much everything that has to do with Bungie gunplay, and they're going to do everything they can to make it just really feel good. Like gunplay in Destiny is about feel, and Halo games, a lot of Halo games like incorporate some of these mechanics too. This is not a new thing. This is not like a scandal or anything. So what you're going to have is you're going to have this sort of, again, assume these are all ticks of time. You have these really short, tight together ticks of time, and then all the way probably here, you're might notice this, but I'm drawing these so they get spaced out more and more. And this is kind of, I'm kind of exaggerating, or I guess underplaying how much force goes into the reticle right here. It'd probably be something more like this, like literally every tick, and then it very quickly, exponentially like drops off. And yeah, there's clearly more ticks here than there are here, but I'm trying to demonstrate this is sort of like the general concept here. Like imagine these are a different form of tick of time. I could draw these green or something, but I think you can understand the point. So now how aim punch works is ultimately the reticle, which I'm gonna draw ourselves a little reticle here. It's going to be a square. And then this is going to be your camera right here. And then I'm going to put a green dot as your reticle. So your reticle at T2 position, that's what we call, was over here. And your camera is over here. Now, obviously, the reticle is going to eventually have to sync back to the camera, but in any shooter game, in a normal shooter game, this is how this would work, is you'd have this force here, and then it would go back down. So this would be a two-way flinch. So you'd have sort of this work like this, and then again, sort of spaced out more. And then on the way down, you'd actually have something more like this, like a very, very smooth sort of motion. And sometimes even a decelerating motion. So if you go, so in other words, something more like this. Again, these would be like each tick. And again, these aren't to scale from like each other, but this is basically to give you an idea of how things work. The settling period is going to be, or basically T is going to be less than T here. So just to get that out of the way. So this is how things are going to work in other games. You're going to have your camera go up to this position, and you have the camera here, do this, and then you're going to have the reticle just go back down. So that's how things work in other games. You can kind of see how much the reticle gets deflected here. And again, if you go to the video, you can go see that as I showed here. The reticle does that. Does exactly that, actually, just like any other game. This is his second attempt. There, see? It goes from there to there. That's how it works in any other game. The only difference is the camera gets pushed over here. Now, you might think that the camera getting pushed towards the target is something that's going to make it easier to aim with, but again, aiming in Destiny is something that occurs over time, and in fact, any game is something that occurs over time. And Bungie, in pretty much all mechanics, is going to incorporate sort of the overtime and really take advantage of the fact that gunplay occurs over time. So what you have here is, what makes this different from this is the reticle settling period, or I guess what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to use this nice blue line here for this one, is going to go back to the camera. Now, as you notice, you might notice this, but this line here, it's kind of an optical illusion. This is like the classic optical illusion where you put something next to something bigger and you can't see it. But if you take this and go down here, this right here, if this arrow were here and you moved it over, would probably stop about, if you rotated it and kind of make a little curvy path here, would stop about right here. So actually what's happening is the reticle is being deflected quite a bit farther away from, or further away from the camera than it would if they used a more classical form of flinch. I'm just going to kind of delete this. Control Z, Control Z. But what actually occurs over time is not this blue vector I'm showing you. It's actually completely different because, again, it's something that occurs over time. The camera is moving. And say for, and I'm going to actually clear this out so that I can show how this works. Oh, okay, crap. How do I just, paint is so hard to work with. Okay, cool. Let's do new, don't save, cool. Zoom in, cool. Make our brush nice and small. Okay, it is. So I'm gonna put up this brown arrow here, And let's control plus or... if you can't figure out, I'm really not good at paint. That's so weird that's doing that. There we go. So you're gonna have your, I'm gonna control Z all this. You have your reticle displacement here. But again, you have something occurring over time. And we'll say that these are the upwards ticks over time. So I'm going to kind of represent the acceleration in a more easier to see fashion. How this works, how this area here, the explosive force kind of goes up really fast. And then I'm going to sort of demonstrate what happens as it goes down. And to do that, I'm going to draw this pink again here, this pink arrow. Yes, I'm using angle snapping to keep the line there straight. No, my mouse skills do not allow me to aim that straight. So what's going to happen is we're going to take these marks here, these 4, and these are going to be the first half of the camera displacement. Right here. And then you're going to have another set of, I guess, camera displacements that occur right here. And this is as the reticle goes downwards. So using the return vector, again, a vector is just point A to point B. It's going to be linear for each tick, but emphasis on each tick. So what ends up happening is the reticle is going to bounce up, and this is drawing in relative to the position. I'm actually using yellow for the upwards angle. So instead of this brown line, actually you can completely ignore this brown line for this purpose. It actually gets really interesting how this works. So you have your yellow line, which I'm used to represent the upwards motion. So you're going to have, this is going to be what you see in game, or in other words, the reticle displacement relative to the camera position. And that is that you're going to have something like this occur here. And then you're going to have this. And then you can kind of see here what's going on there. And then you're going to have sort of this. You're going to have a curve happen relative to the camera, because again, this camera over here is moving, and seeing this here, this is more of like a what you see in the middle of your screen versus this camera here is deceptive. But basically with how this has an acceleration formula applied to it, or has an acceleration curve to apply to it, and this is linear, what ends up happening is the curve for the camera ends up being the curve relative to from the camera to the reticle displacement ends up being in a curve shape, basically to your human, to the eye. So again, we're gonna have this next tick here. Oh gosh, I'm really showing there we go. So here, and this is again relative to your camera. So another curve here. Oh my gosh. Another curve here. At this point, this is looking like a Ronald McDonald sort of thing. And your color 2 here. This is what happens when you change things to sort of a linear function. And this color 1 keeps messing up, because of course it does while I'm demonstrating it. But basically, you get the point. You can kind of see. And I kind of want to draw it, like the whole thing, so you can really see what's happening here. Because again, I intend to do this sort of as accurately as possible. So you have your end position kind of right here. Now I'm going to do an equal amount over here, but basically this blue return vector is going to be interesting, because Again, it's going to be mapped to the last half of the camera ticks, which again are linear, so this is actually a curved return motion relative to your camera position. So it's going to look something like this. And I'm going to use green dots to represent this. This is something that occurs, I guess, over time. And keep in mind, as I said earlier, the time intervals here equal less than these time intervals here. You get the idea. Basically, it spends more time doing this than it does this. And that actually matters because if it spent more time kicking up and less time kicking this, then band wipe, it would have a point, and that flinch is really, really easy to overcome. And I'm going to go into this in a video at the end of the video in why flinch is so easy to overcome, because it's not the reason you think it is. So keep in mind, I'm not saying anything by drawing this out about snipers being whether they're overpowered or not. I actually think there are problems with snipers. I just think they're not the ones that people think they are, basically. So what actually ends up happening here is you have this curve, and when you, as you might know, in just a general rule of geometry, when you have something curved to go from point A to point B versus a straight line, if you flatten this line here, what I just drew is what's called, I think, a chord. This would be a chord, and this is an arc. If this were a perfect circle. So what ends up happening is that versus that would be, you have a straight line here. The actual total motion of the reticle is actually going to be more like this. So I'm guess with this video, I'm going to answer the why question on multiple levels. And the why of why it works like this is because it's a way for Bungie to actually add more flinch and more like reticle motion relative to the camera without having to make this giant, just huge like flinch line like this. You'd have to draw like a line like this big versus like this big to represent flinch in game, or to represent what's actually happening with the camera and stuff. So again, Bungie kind of through the camera creates this curved return vector, or I guess it looks like a vector. It looks like a physical vector when you're just following the reticle. Again, when you're following the reticle, this looks like just boop, boop. You don't get this whoop, whoop kind of a thing. Again, you don't really get that when you're looking at it. So now I'm going to sort of talk about what this means to the player. And I guess sort of why this is important. So in Destiny, let's say you have this, you have a shot being taken, and remember, like, a shot is something that's going to be occurring over time. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to sort of draw this. We're going to pretend like this is your time scale here. This is like linear notches. And we're going to then apply it to the lines. Now let's talk about human reaction time, or a player's ability to react over time. We'll say that this is a 150 RPM hand cannon that's being shot because currently that's the most popular. And we're going to say that this is, we're going to take, what is that, 266 milliseconds, I think, is that what that is? And 0.8 seconds divided by 3 is 3 shots in that period, or I guess 3 gaps it is. It's actually 2 gaps, so it's 0.4 seconds, I believe, would be 150 RPM, and I guess I can check that by being like 60 divided by 150 equals, 0.4 seconds. Okay, so we'll say that this is 0.4 seconds. And I'm kind of glossing over this, and I'll talk about this later. Kind of really, so this is 0.4 seconds total. So the human reaction time, or the ability for you to react to things, is actually really, really bad compared to how fast things happen in games. And then with this kill time here, there's also this other dimension here, and this is when you're aiming down sights, and people don't talk about this in kill times. And this is why hipfire guns are really, really good, like last word. It's because you can sort of ignore this here. And this is another conservatively, or I guess liberally, for most players, this would be another 0.2 seconds because of like just how long the gun takes to aim. So this is just aiming in general. This is like in a real situation, because again, band wipe is, and I guess no, not again, because I'm actually mentioning this for the first time. Band wipe is not really describing a situation that is realistic, because again, Destiny gunplay is meant to happen over time, and it's something that you're supposed to just kind of aim and shoot and stuff like that. So standing still is like a really, really bad way to demonstrate this game's gun physics, unless you really, really dig deep into it, which is what I'm doing here. So this is sort of your aim period. We'll say this is like 0.2 seconds to aim down sights. And then actually there's another period. It's the time it takes to actually land on target. And this is where there's like skill gap involved. We'll actually say that this right here, this orange, is how long it takes to aim down sights. This is how long it takes for you to move your reticle to the target, and this is how long it takes between shots. So, again, I'm describing Flinch from the perspective of somebody who's shooting. Band wipe, with his friend, is assuming that this whole thing right here doesn't exist, so I'm going to erase it, but I kind of want to put that there just so it's in your mind. I'm sorry that this is ending up being kind of a really long physics lecture, but who cares? So, cool, you have your overtime demonstration sort of here. We're going to pretend you have the average human reaction time. You're a new player and you don't know anything about the game. You have to respond to things as you see them on screen because you don't know how things work. So your ability to react to flinch is going to be really, really bad. So let's say you 0.2 seconds, you see it initially, you pick up on the fact that, oh, I need to move my mouse or controller or whatever back onto target here, and you're watching, you don't know anything about how the game's physics works. The camera is really, really disorienting because again, to get over the camera flinch, you actually have to kind of feel that, because a lot of players don't know it's there, but they adjust for it anyways. So let's conservatively say that, or let's give this new player the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they can respond 3 times every 0.4 seconds. So when we're drawing out our flinch curve that we drew out earlier, in other words, relative to the camera, we're going to draw this out right here. And then we're going to draw a return vector right here, which is also going to look like a curve when it's mapped out relative to the camera push here. So the player, you have these 3 notches. I'm going to draw them. This is where the player can react to the camera push. But again, the player doesn't really even know the camera push exists. So you have this here, and then you have this here. This is what a player who does not understand the game or does not know the game very well is seeing. And this return vector here is going to be more even. So this is the same point. And then this is where the reticle is going to end up, and this is where the camera is going to end up. So this is what a sort of less experienced player is going to see. Notice how there's not really much the player can like respond to here, and that's why flinching when players like started out Destiny felt so, I guess, visceral and hard to deal with, is because of this. So this camera flinch really, really matters for players like this because it adds a level of mastery to the gun, because over time you're going to have more response periods, and I'm going to map that out here. But basically, if this player is reacting to what's happening on screen, they're only going to be able to react to this right here, this vector here, because this is all they're going to physically be able to predict and see. Because they can only, this is their three periods of time. They're reacting directly to it. Now, human reaction time is a lot different than executive reaction time, or predictive reaction time. Our brains are really, really good at predicting things, and over time, when you get a mastery of your gun, you're gonna sort of feel this camera push, and I'm gonna take and remove all these X's. And you can sort of, in a way, your brain bypasses these sort of hard limitations by sort of being able to picture what comes next. And let's say this is a player who has played this game for a really, really long time. And what I'm going to hint at is that this player is the kind of player you're going to run into in trials. Again, they've been playing for a really long time. They've been sniping for a really long time. They felt what it's like to be flinched many, many times. They sort of already have the general idea of how flinch works. So let's give them an extra tick here. An extra tick here. Actually, we're gonna say this player is like, this is the best. This is your player who's on the 7th win on your ticket. They know where the reticle is going to go, and they can kind of respond based on where this time. They can kind of respond at every single tick almost. So you're gonna have this. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna have to cram these in there. So you're gonna have what's more like this for this player. Again, this gets slower over here, or I guess this would be reverse. Maybe I was drawing this wrong the whole time. The idea is it starts really fast and gets slower. So you're gonna have this here for a player. And actually, that's not correct because there's the return vector. Sorry, this is really, really hard to visualize, even for somebody who works with this stuff all the time. You have your return vector here. Now, why am I, the question you're going to ask is, why am I not factoring in this return vector? And the reason is because by the time you get to the end of this return vector, or before you actually settle on point, and this is not something Bandwidth talks about, is you could get shot again. And that would be another bounce, and that would be another vector here. So I'm going to sort of address that right now, and then you have another return vector. Should look like this. I know that's red, but this is the general idea. Is if you waited for this to settle back on target, you would get shot again. And I guess that's the ultimate sort of disproof of what Bandwipe is trying to say, is that you get flinched again if you actually wait for this to do the thing he wants, which is where he's saying, basically what he's saying is that you end up on target and you'll hit your target because of that. And I'm going to go into aim vectors again, because aiming is again something that happens over time, just like how flinch happens over time. So yeah, this would happen, and then say another one, and then you'd get one like this, and it'd go up there, and you'd have a return vector here. So just kind of getting this out of the way. I'm kind of being scatterbrained with this presentation because there's no other way to do this than to sort of get in the nitty gritty. Okay, so that's sort of just disproving that real quick. So you have this really, really good player here, and they can respond to this at a number of periods, and it's basically up to them to choose when they respond to it. So say they get it instantly, like they instantly know, and this is prediction. So say a player knows when they're going to be shot, and this is a skill of mastery, sort of knowing when your opponent is going to shoot you over time. Say this is the total graph of when you're aiming here. And as a good player, you just know that their first shot is going to be here. You just know it. So you could technically just react to this right here. If you predict that right, you can react to this. Now let's say your prediction's a little bit off. Again, even really, really good players make mistakes. This right here is your vector. You just have to slam your reticle real quick down. Now the question is this a problem? And the answer to that is not really, because a mechanic that you can sort of overcome is really kind of expected, because this is not, people are coming at this from the wrong angle, and it's that people are coming at this from the angle of flinch should be something that prevents you from getting your shot off. And there are a lot of reasons that flinch should not work in that way, and I'll go into those in a bit. Flinch is meant to sort of just add to generic gunplay, and it's a mechanic that works on snipers like every other gun does. And it works that way because it would be absolutely stupid for Bungie to just change how flinch works for one gun, because they don't do that. They want the best gunplay possible, and also in PvE they'd have to completely change how they code it, and they're using one, I guess, streamlined formula for how flinch works for everything. Now going back to this, the player could technically wait this out and feel this out and hit on the return vector for the reticle displacement, and that would look like something like this. Again, they'd have to move the reticle less the more time they wait. Now the pinnacle, I guess, the closest to what Bandwipe is saying, the closest thing you could even argue is like what Bandwipe is saying is if the player waited for this exact point before getting shot, or like say right here, and then waited and then did this vector. All of these are the vectors a player would have to do to return their reticle to course from where they were aiming. And again, I'm going to go into aim vectors in a second, because this gets way, way more complicated when you add an aim vector. So this would sort of be the adjustment that a player, and it's very, very small, but again, a player would have to react, know how each portion of this, to be able to take advantage of what Bandwipe is saying, the player would have to be really, 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 really fucking good, is what I'm trying to say. And again, seeing that would cause frustration, because you're in a game mode where everybody is really, really fucking good. And again, flinch is supposed to be something you can sort of almost bypass if you're really, really fucking good. Which is why new players feel like there's a lot of flinch in this game, and why when people entered this game at first, they thought there was a lot of flinch, and over time they just like stopped complaining about it, and now they're complaining that there's not enough. Okay, so I want to make a new one. And we're going to start to go into another portion of aiming in Destiny, and that is, again, this is going to be your aim vector. This is how a player aims. And for this, I'm going to actually draw a head right here, and I'm going to actually just straight up do exactly what Bandwipe set up, which is a reticle here. And again, the thesis here is that, and for this reticle, I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, and I'm going to show the reticle and the camera. So how does aiming work? Basically, when you aim, you're going to want to go towards the target. And keep in mind, Bandwipe didn't actually aim in this. He just kind of let the reticle set still. So he completely ignored the time aspect to this, including the time that it takes to aim. So we're going to draw a vector here. A good player, we're going to assume you're a good player. You want to aim, you want to snap onto the target. And there might be some variance here as far as how a player aims. Maybe they have like a squiggly line because they're human. I'm just going to kind of get rid of that just because. But yeah, but for all intents and purposes, this is what happens when you aim over time. We're going to add these little time marks here. 2, 3, 4, and then time marks for return vector here. So what happens here is your camera is going to pop towards the target, but not quite. This is where the target is going to end up, or this is where the reticle is going to end up. And then this is where the reticle is going to shoot to, at we call this T sub 1, which in physics, like, just basically it refers to like different critical points in time. We're going to refer to this as T sub 2, position of the reticle. Because again, your reticle is forming this sort of triangle, your camera is forming this sort of line. I'm going to put this here. This would be a reticle. I'm putting the reticle at the same point as the head because you want the reticle on the head. So we're going to talk about aim vector displacement, which again, your intent over time is to hit the head. And when you go to do it, you're pre-aiming, you're making a flick, like a flicking motion, like whoop, like that. That's what you want to do. You want to get to the target as fast as possible, like whoop, like that. So you notice I made like a little curve there to get the target. And kind of I'm showing off my aim here that is either bad or good depending on how you interpret it. This is actually a really, really far flick that I'm showing here. This is kind of like really, really microscopic. More in realistically, it'd be like this to here. But again, we're here to talk about time. So when you're being flinched, we're going to talk about what happens to your aim vector. And there's, of course, the perception of what happens to your aim vector and what actually happens to your aim vector. So this is what actually happens to your reticle. And as you move it over time, is you have this curve here. And notice I'm not really drawing this to go back to position, because this is reticle displacement. And the reason this is because most players aim a lot faster than, or a good player will aim a lot faster than 0.4 seconds. And this sort of goes back into being a newer player. Is a newer player's aim vector is this is like how a player is going to perceive their aim going. And remember what I showed earlier is a good player can adjust more of these to getting back to their aim vector. Well, a bad player is not going to experience that. They're going to experience something more like this because they're aiming slowly. And they're actually going to get to the point where the player could flinch them again, which, as I kind of said, it was like around right here. Because again, Bungie actually, I'm going to talk about the impact stat near the end of this, because again, I have to fully flesh this out to talk about flinch. So this is how a lesser experienced player, and so they're feeling more of the fuckery involved in this, and more of the displacement, more positions, and again, they're experiencing the game in fewer ticks because they don't know how the game works. So a good player is snapping on target as fast as they can. At any point, they can kind of curve their reticle to make this adjustment back to where they want it to go. And I'm going to talk about the minimal adjustment angle, and that is sort of this brushing motion that a player would have to do to get back on target. And it's going to be the tippy top of the head, or I guess imagine if this were from a different position, it'd just basically be all of this but mirrored. So if this were coming from the bottom, then this angle would be, this would be here, this would be a curve here, and then the player's adjustment angle would be like this. So the player's adjustment angle, or minimum adjustment curve, is going to be like this for the reticle. If this were just the reticle, this is what this would be like. Player just has to make this small little bump. But because the camera displaces the reticle more, what actually happens is it's going to psychologically feel more like this. And as you get better at the game, you'll be able to naturally adjust for this camera adjustment. I've actually seen my aim before, and I've kind of seen how I adjust to the camera motion. So again, the camera motion is only something you can really adjust for if you have experience with your gun. So we're gonna say this is like how skilled you are, is how much you feel this. It's kind of like an arbitrary like thing where, let's say these lines are like your skill. I know this is sounding really stupid, but when things are unpredictable to your brain and you're talking about unpredictable events, you're technically adding a fifth dimension to something, and that's anything. If something is random compared to, like, say, an AI, and this is how deep learning works, then it's just can be just treated as another dimension. So we're gonna say this is like skill, or your ability to predict how the camera shake is working. So this can be tightened down, and then your adjustment vector can be tightened down, or how much you have to adjust your vector because you can't predict things. Again, the more I talk, the more this sounds ridiculous, and that's okay because Bungie gunplay is not meant to be something that you kind of break down easily, and that's why their gunplay is like par to none. Is because they don't think about gunplay in like a simplistic fashion. So this is sort of like where you could. This is sort of like your correction angle right here. This is where you would correct to had you corrected as much as a player who doesn't, or who psychologically doesn't experience camera shake or the camera flinch because of their mastery of the gun. But if you didn't know about the camera flinch, and you didn't feel the camera flinch, because nobody actually knows about the camera flinch, as far as I can tell, like me and Drewsky are the only ones who noticed it. Notice that these adjustment angles are really big. This is how much you're going to feel the flinch. And this is, again, why new players complain about flinch a lot and old players don't. It's because this is what new players feel. They have to get to this point, they have to adjust to the minimum angle to right here. And plus, they're also dealing with less ability to respond to things. So again, as you can see, over time, as you master a gun, what I'm trying to say here is that these mechanics make it exponentially harder to hit a target, or the obstacle becomes exponentially harder the less skilled you are with a gun and the less you can correct for the various flinch mechanics. If you're really good, it's basically like that camera push doesn't exist, but it's a way for Bungie to add more aim punch. And again, the question would be, what happens if Bungie just added more aim punch? And at this point, I'm going to get more into I've kind of already like shown how this works. And again, to summarize what I showed is I was showing how reticle displacement works, because this occurs over time and reticle flinch occurs over time. And the result of that is actually really neat. And, actually, I'm going to go into this because this is sort of like a shout out to Drewsky. Because, as you know, everything that occurs in the middle of the reticle is like your aim assist cone, which I'm drawing this in 2D. It's something like this. This is really exaggerated. And then you have like your error angle or something like that. And that's this sort of penumbra here. And then you have your probability of hitting here. But if you're good, of course, you're going to hit within the aim assist cone, or even closer in. Maybe you're a good player. You're going to actually, this is your cone of aim where you're going to tend to hit if you're good. So this is what happens at the reticle. So when you put this in sort of like a from player point of view perspective, it's going to look something more like this. So this is your aim assist cone right here. Now I'm going to do something which is not really something you can demonstrate in 2 dimensions very easily, but I'm going to make or draw out sort of like a hypercone. And that's kind of what you're dealing with flinch. So yeah, I'm gonna do that real quick. I'm just quickly thinking of how this works. So this is if the head is within this area, this would be a hit. So let's say your reticle starts here. Now I'm going to do a time flat, or I'm gonna do sort of like flatten time to be a linear, sort of like a linear spatial dimension in this drawing. And what this is going to look like as your reticle moves over time is something like this. Now, what's really cool about this is that, again, these are all cones. here. Each one of these circles represents a cone. If you drew them sideways, it would look like this. This is the side angle. I guess this is the best way to do this. And you can kind of already sort of see what I'm getting at here. Notice I'm sort of drawing in the middle. These are you have a cone here, cone here, cone here, cone here, cone here, cone here. This is what it looks like from the side. This whole structure here is what's called a hypercone. And then you have another cone here, which is also a hypercone, and this is your linear camera motion here, which is the center of your screen. And you have what would actually be another detachment. So say you're, because again, when you're talking about physics of first-person shooters, you're looking at a first-person angle, and you're actually simulating a rotation and not a thing. So you're gonna have we're gonna actually turn this, we're gonna flatten this into a line, and just say like this is the hypercone, because that's essentially what people do when they're talking about things over time and drawing them out. So what's basically happening is you're having it detached, and you're gonna see that this is actually like cross-eye vision. So this is what the reticle is going to appear to relative to where the camera was before. And this is where the camera is. And now imagine that these lines represent this entire structure of hypercones. And like it's going to look really, really messy when you try to draw this out. There's going to be like lots of overlap here. There's like a lot of uncertainty right here. Just a lot of sort of deviation that really, really like goes to show how much physics goes in this game. Like see, so these are like different angles here that you could have your camera pointed. And again, what happens here is that these all represent the camera moving from here to here on its own. And this represents the reticle moving on its own. So you have what's called a hypercone, plain and simple. And again, if we were to draw out what a skilled player feels or sees in a game, essentially, like the feeling of this game allows you to feel like none of this is stuff you can see, obviously, because time, contrary to people who work in physics, is not actually something you see as a spatial dimension, but it's something you definitely feel as a spatial dimension. Specifically as you get better at seeing things over time, which is what I said earlier, being able to predict how things move and stuff like that. So let's say you're a good player, and this is just like how you feel the game. You have a hypercone here, and this is just me drawing like these are like lines that kind of splay out. These are all cones here. Like you could technically draw them like this. Like let's say this is a bad player. They can feel like this really, really like disjointed, like, oh, there's only 4 cones. Like their hypercone has fewer 3D cones in it in how they view the game. And then their camera shake represents, or their camera reticle displacement is another hypercone. And because they don't feel this mechanic at all, we'll just say it's like really low resolution in their minds. Like how they perceive it is like low res. So this is what they see, and notice like this is really, really hard. Like say if you're trying to hit a 3-dimensional target, you're trying to hit a 3-dimensional target from a reticle, and your reticle is doing all this shit. And you feel like your reticle is doing all this shit and you have no clue what's going on. This is kind of what Flinch feels like to, like, I'm going to draw sort of like an uncertainty cloud, because the more uncertain a player is or a person is when they're looking at a physics model that is not straightforward, the more, like, I guess, cognitive uncertainty there is. This is what they're going to feel. It's like the reticle is doing something like this. Just some ridiculous, just horrible motion. Now, back to a good player. Now, a good player, as I showed earlier, has more X's on their overtime thing. So what essentially that does is what they're feeling is these finer cones. Notice these are kind of, I'm trying really, really hard here, but this is, again, this is not something, there's gonna be some overlap in these cones. So this player has like, this guy's playing in 4 dimensions. This guy's playing 4-dimensional chess. He's a really good player. I'm glad I'm making lots of quotables here. This guy's a really, really good player. Standout, he is in touch with his third eye hypercone. Or whatever. It kind of is, though. It's like a third eye. There's like an extra sense of being able to sense where your reticle goes. Notice that there's so many points that this player perceives that this does. You can't even really tell what this is. And then this player is also going to have their third eye on the other thing. It's almost like this. It's almost like their sense of this right here, these pink, like doesn't exist just because like I'm just gonna draw it like this. Because this player is like almost completely negated this thing here because they have mastery over their gun. This is like how like Cami Cakes or Frostbolt views the game, or somebody with like a 90% headshot ratio, which yes, there are legitimate players with 90% headshot ratios. They tend to come from like CSGO, and they come to this game and they have poor movement because that's a lot of the skill gap, as somebody else said in a different video, is movement. So basically this player has this here on lockdown. All they have to do is adjust this here back to their position, and if we turn this into like a uncertainty cloud, I know like nobody wants a primer on particle physics here, but when you're talking about cognition and things you don't know, it actually gets surprisingly like close to how like the uncertainty principle, where I am completely off on a tangent that nobody cares about. At this point, you're just like watching. Oh, wrong one. So it's gonna be something like this for that player. Now, say the head box is about this size, or oops, about this size. What you're going to notice is like you take that head and you put it in here. I'm gonna try to make it about. You can see about like 70% of these lines, and notice there are more lines in the center than the outside. I kind of did that on purpose because these are kind of like mistakes people made. Like say there's like 70% here that they can just overcome flinch. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's a reason you get shot through flinch a lot, and it's because players are really, really good. I took all this time to sort of demonstrate why this is like it is, because Bandwipe asks why in poor faith, I answer questions in good faith. So after all that, this is kind of what things look like. Imagine that these are the uncertainties of like hypercones, and like the worse you get at the game, the more it feels like this is happening with your reticle. Like this is the uncertainty. And say you're even worse at the game, you have like, oh, whoops, this, something like this. And notice it gets less tight to the center, because like instead of not hitting your flinch, notice now this is like a 30% chance of hitting flinch here, right? Through flinch right here. This is like a new player. If even. I don't even know if new players can hit through flinch a lot. I remember when I first started playing Destiny and Bungie games, like I could not shoot through flinch at all. This was like 5 years ago. Okay, cool. Now, the next discussion. This is like the next portion of the video, is what do I think should be done with snipers? Because clearly there are multiple solutions to sniping as a problem. And first of all, you have to decide, stretching out because it's been a very long video. You have to decide what the problem is with snipers, and you have to decide what the solution is going to be, and you have to decide what solutions there are. So I would say in Destiny, because of how people complain in trials, I would say you have your mouse here. I'm purposely putting this right in the side of the mouse so that there can't be weird jokes. Pressing this button right here is really fucking good. Just having your reticle, I'll put your camera, and then you're gonna put your reticle in the center of it. This is like really, really powerful. Like that's the problem, is that just standing still, standing in one position, and aiming down sights is really, really powerful. So what would you want to do in that case to make this less powerful, or in other words, oppressive? I guess I have to explain why this is so powerful. And that's because on PC, and when the game is playing at a really, really high FPS and you can basically see everything, like snapping aim vectors, like instant, like that. You can kind of move wherever you want. And having your sight pre-aimed down sights, I kind of touched on this earlier, it negates this time area here, so that you don't have to aim and stuff, and you don't have to take that time. And you can also stay in one position. And it feels really, really shitty, because you have like this player here, and he's not really doing anything. He's not really moving left to right. I'm gonna put like a no symbol. This is verboten here. I'm gonna make it like this. This is the problem, is the player's kind of just standing here, and I'm gonna give them just to be cheeky, I'm gonna give them a sniper glint. This is my MS Paint version of a sniper glint. You're seeing this, and this is obnoxious. Like say you're on, and this could also be RMB, and I'm actually gonna talk about controller in a second, because players have this complaint about controller. Again, we're gonna come from the angle of Trials, because Trials is sort of at the spotlight. And Trials is a game where camping reses and being near revives is extremely powerful. So that's why it's so different in the past, and why sniping suddenly feels so oppressive. So it's really, really, really fucking annoying when you have, let's say this is Widow's Court. This is stairs. So you have this here. And you have your stairs here. And then we're going to draw your stairs here. Oh, it looks like something like this. Then you have behind this corner here. And then this is like this, and this is like this. Then you have this sort of wall over here. And this is actually a nice sloping hill right here. Again, this is generally, actually a player can stand here, which is not a platform. So say this is what's going on, and there's actually a lot of cool, if I drew this out, I could teach you a lot about why certain positions are good, and this building is really, really big, if I remember correctly. It goes all the way back here, then there's a space. A player shooting from right here with, like, say they're not even all the way out of cover and they can still see you. Player here with their sniper glint. I'm gonna make this red this time because I actually only half see their sniper glint. This is really fucking annoying to play against, because this player here like has this like great angle, and they have all these like things they can shoot through. Like I can see fucking everything, and all they have to do is barely, just barely move out of your way if they see you and they think that you can shoot them. Really, really annoying. This player has no reason to stop aiming down sights because of how powerful it is to just stand here with your reticle scope. That is what I think is the problem in Destiny. You can argue with me in the comment section below, or you can email me on, or you can send a angry Twitter thing on my thing, or you can, I guess, verbally abuse me. I don't really care. People have done that before. It's not the first time. You say this is wrong, you're wrong, my real problem. And you can actually do the thing where you say, my problem is just that it's too much. It's people are just shooting through Flinch too much. Well, I just explained to you why people shoot through Flinch too much. It's not really even something that's meant to and this is what I'm about to get into now, is that Flinch is a really, really bad mechanic for to be used with the goal of stopping snipers. It's really, really actually horrible for a number of reasons. And I'm going to sort of go into that. So I'm going to draw us a little hallway here. Again, I'm abusing angle snapping, so it's not like my aim is actually this good. Oh wait, here. This would actually be a hallway. There we go. And this doesn't. Okay, there we go. Cool, cool. I'm doing this properly. And here, let me just pop an eraser here. Could I have done this over time? Yes. But I am kind of making commentary here. We're gonna pretend like there's a door here. I'm just doing this as commentary because, you know, taking my damn time, and we're gonna add perspective in, so this is gonna be slanted. So we're gonna add like a door here, kind of a thing. And this would be a wall, a separate wall. This door, we'll pretend like this is a hallway and this is a door people can pass through. So you have, say, your end of the hallway here. Absolutely gorgeous drawing, right? I'm truly an artist. We'll say this hallway is like, this is a really cool hallway. You're like standing at it from like the right side. So we're gonna make this like a little tighter. This is the right wall of the hallway. It should be more like that to make this more realistic. And then you have your ceiling here and everything. So, say there's a guy right here, ish. And this is sort of drawing the physics. This is not like what this is going to look like. So you have your guy here. As Frostbolt would say, my guy. So I have my guy here. And he is peeking in and out. This is the guy you fucking hate doing his little reticle thing. So little old you, and there's his little reticle glint here. Little old you also has a reticle, and we're going to draw it with orange. You're holding out a hand cannon. Let's say you're really, really good with a hand cannon. Or say you're holding up your... here, I'm going to actually put this even closer. Because you are really, really good. Your reticle is like right here. But let's say you haven't aimed yet. Or let's say you have aimed yet. There's actually multiple ways to look at this. Again, I'm going to ignore all the time shit for now. So you have this here. And when flinch happens, it's going to be something like this. I'm just going to draw these curve things, and by now you've understood. And you're going to have your aim vector here. Now the headshot hurt box is going to be something like this. It's a really, really fucking big thing. You can see that flinch, and we're going to add the, this is going to be your aim vector, and we're going to add the camera push, which is actually like this nice little, it's actually not going to be as much as your aim vector. You're going to have this little camera push here, and that will increase, this will increase the distance between the reticle and the center of your screen. We're going to add that little camera push in. Notice that this entire thing, this entire structure here is actually kind of like that. So if you take that shape, and I'm kind of going to remove it. I'm going to draw this head, her box, inside of it. No, oh, here. It's actually not really to scale because I've kind of made this bigger. So I need to make this one bigger. Now you kind of notice even without any tightening or like skill being added in of that giant hypercone I showed you earlier, like more resolution of being able to see and feel and sense the game using your brain sponge, you're going to notice that this is still a pretty large area of this here. So what am I saying with this is I'm saying the magnetism is huge in Destiny, and that's really like part of it, but the answer to what should be done about it is a lot more nuanced. Now I'm going to show what happens if you just added more flinch. Keep in mind, more flinch has actually been added to this game. Like, this solution has been done before. So let's take these all out. let's put this back on here. Now let's do the solution that people want. I've already showed you kind of why the camera push doesn't matter and why removing it really wouldn't do. At the very least, you can pretty much probably agree with all the explanation I did that the camera push is definitely not something that's beneficial. It's disorienting, especially for newer players. It's something that you kind of master, get over. There's no really a way to take advantage of it because you never actually know when a player is going to shoot, and the best you can do is sort of predict when they're going to shoot. So let's say you flinched this much instead. Say we just added a fuck ton of flinch. Now the problem with this is that you're doubling, let's say you're doubling the flinch here. And flinch is just, you can already see this, is that flinch is already starting to look ridiculous. Now with that, you increase the amount of flinch, you're going to also increase the amount of camera push because the two are linked in game, and you're going to push it even closer to the head. So now you have this big structure, and yes, this thing is bigger. Yes, it's bigger. It's about twice as big, almost in volume. You have this tiny little head here. But again, keep in mind that a good player, it doesn't really feel this as much. They can like cut this down, like every little bit they can linearly like perceive their flinch vector as being less of a problem. It decreases this area exponentially and gets closer to the size of this circle. Now, the sort of second portion of this is that this would be active in PvE. Bungie does not split the gunplay in this game between PvE and PvP. And also, at a certain point, this is just getting unrealistic and ridiculous. And there are more direct ways to deal with this. And as you can see, there are two geometries involved in this. I don't know why I did that instead of starting a new one, but I did. So there are two geometries involved here. There's a giant flinch square I showed you of like where all the reticle, like all the shit the reticle does, or like you perceive it as it doing. You could expand this. You could do that, or you could cut down on this. But there's another problem here. And that is that there is a reason magnetism is so high in this game. And this is a whole different video. But the TLDR of it is you move, compared to other games in Destiny, you move, and I'll use my little time thing, you move really, really fast. So say this is like Destiny, you move like this fast. Like that. In Halo, you move pretty fucking slowly. Say that each of these spaces are different periods of time. So you have your guy here, he moves all the way over here. This is different, clearly. Like, clearly different movement speeds. Now Call of Duty would probably be more, or actually no, let's go CS. CSGO is kind of probably even slower. So like CS is like the pinnacle of like a skilled game. And keep in mind, it does have magnetism in it. So like and then I'm gonna go back to actually Hypercones here real quick, because now I'm actually gonna justify bloom in this game, or not bloom, but magnetism, and tell you sort of why it works the way it does. So we're gonna put this back here. So let's say this is CS:GO and this is Destiny. The Destiny hurt box is, or no, this is CS:GO, this is Destiny, and this is like relative to each other how fast you move. And this, like, keep in mind, Destiny is also not a 2D shooter, so you can like move in this direction too, in this direction, in this direction, and you might start to get or understand why I was talking about hypercones. Because in Destiny, your structure of potential movement is like this giant hypercone thing. Like in all the places you could go. And you can get there really, really fast. And again, I'm just like drawing these like little loop-de-loop circles, and you can imagine that there's like little cones coming out of them. Like this is like how movement in Destiny works. And this would be like why these cones exist. This is like just sort of like where your head would be. So if I go sort of erase all this. So that's like how Destiny is. So clearly like magnetism needs to exist in this game because in CSGO, or like a competitive shooter, your headshot hurt box is going to be like this big because it has less than magnetism. There is magnetism in there, but less. Destiny is this big. Now, when you increase the radius of a circle, you increase it exponentially the area of the circle by that same amount. So the radius wise, this is not actually that big of a radius increase. It's like double, but you actually increase the area of it by quite a bit. There's like 4 times more area to hit in this, which makes actually a lot of sense because you're moving like 4 times faster and there's more directions you can move. So just straight up reducing the magnetism is probably not the best solution to this. You could here this. Imagine this is tightened in, because that's like your first instinct to like when I'm talking about these shapes is like Prodigy. Why not just decrease the magnetism? And you could, but the thing is with sniping, you don't want to punish people who move around because ultimately that's the problem with sniping is that it encourages players not to move. So you don't want to punish the players who move around a lot. And if you looked at old like Destiny 1 videos, there were like these people who would like slide snipe and it was like really, really cool. So like you'd have a player like go from here, they go really, really fast to here, and then Reticle, and then boom, hit this guy over here, and he's dead. Cool. So this is what you would have in Destiny 2, and you can actually make this. Like this guy would be crouching because he's sliding, and there's like this burst momentum, and over time there's like this. Really, really messes with this guy. People like don't do this as much anymore because again, holding down RMB or right trigger is really, really powerful. So why go through all this effort of like moving your reticle and all that shit when you can just kind of hold it? So we don't really want to punish this because this is actually really cool. And what this actually does is it punishes players who are standing still because it's a lot easier to move and shoot on a standing still target. Now say this guy's moving left and right. Say this guy's moving over time. He's probably going to be alive. So this is like an extra dimension. This is movement, and you're encouraging that. So my solution, and this is me theory crafting, would be literally any mechanic that punishes players for holding down their trigger or their mouse button over time. So what would that look like? So say you have your big ass, I'm going to sort of draw this big head, this big bloom, or not bloom, but this big magnetism square here at a certain distance P or whatever, no, Q, N, whatever you want to call it. This is what the magnetism is going to look like, and this is what the head is going to look like. Now imagine you got punished for standing still and holding your reticle. I know this is like a foreign concept to people in trials, but just imagine if this radius decreased over time. Let's say each one of these ticks represents, they could do something really, really punishing, like every tick is like a half second and they like linearly like just sort of like smoothly goes in, and then to the point where it's the head. And then they could have a second one, and this is something else they could add. They could add an error angle to it too, and actually go into the hurt box or go into the actual physical model. And then say you're holding your trigger down for a really long period of time. Then suddenly you have to hit this because the shot could hit anywhere around here. Or like again, that'd be like a blue mechanic, and say this has like a limit. So this is like what you would have to hit. So say after say after something arbitrary, like how long do I think it's reasonable to stay aim down sights? I'd say about like 3.5 seconds. Like check, like I think it's reasonable to like stand with a sniper for like 3.5 seconds and like shoot it. So let's say over that period of 3.5 seconds, you get this sort of collapsing. And remember, as this collapses, the radius decreases, so like the effect of it is like smaller and smaller. So let's say this starts happening, it starts happening slowly and goes in. And let's say technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. By that I mean my reticle's flying off my head. So let's say it's like 3.5 seconds it takes to get from here to here. Now let's say the green is going to take 5 seconds. So this is like if you're standing around, really just like holding your reticle down sights, and you're just taking your time. We'll say this takes 5 total seconds for you to start getting your error angle down to this position. Now what is this going to do? It's kind of like a sway mechanic in other games, but it's not something you invisibly see. And what's great about this is it actually has would have a second side effect, and that would be an error angle would actually like fuck up people using aimbots, because they could still miss. Because like with an aimbot, like you would have to scope and descope and rescope all the time, and that add another dimension. It add timing to this. In other words, it forced the player to engage with the mechanics over time while they're holding their scope down. If you wanted to hold the lane for a long period of time, you'd have to scope in and then descope and then scope in and descope to get the most optimal results. In other words, you'd be sniping. To snipe, the most ideal way to snipe would be to get your aim on target as fast as possible, which I don't think anybody can argue that is something you should encourage in a game like Destiny. Now, that would force even people with the best aimbots, dead center, like perfect aimbots, that would force them, or like an aggressive error angle over time, that would force them to at least engage with them. You would have a chance, like a fighting chance against them, because it'd force them to engage, especially trigger bots, it'd force them to engage with the game by like scoping and descoping. So this would actually be a good way to punish cheaters, and people standing completely still. So this would be my solution. There are a number of other solutions in this game, such as increasing the rate of fire on some guns. I don't think Bungie's going to do that. They could increase the damage of guns and reduce the kill times, so that the player has less time to sort of get used to those hickory dickory. So like imagine this is like your first flinch. Then remember what I said before about this being your next flinch before your reticle perfectly settles. If they made it like say your dead point on a gun, where like say this gun kills in 3 shots. Say this is your killing point right here, or this is actually I'm gonna Control Z that. I'm gonna say your normal killing point with this gun that shoots 4 times a second is right here. But if you took it and put it right here, then the player sniping would have less time up here. And personally, I think kill time should just be a little bit faster anyways, just because, again, like I explained earlier, you move really fast in this game. So it's harder to catch people, like you want to like encourage people to aim really fast and stuff like that and be confident with their shots. All right, so this is another way. Again, that would be the previous is like what my solution would be. It's really like kind of not something you would think of. It's counterintuitive, but then again, good solutions to problems are oftentimes counterintuitive, and that's not tooting my own horn, because I just spent like 2 hours explaining how Flinch works in a way that I don't think anybody else has. So I think I might be like a little bit uniquely qualified to at least say a solution I would come up with is not the worst. Anyways, so back to, I guess, my final discussion is I'm actually going to give you some advice. How do you shoot through Flinch? Well, this is easy. Once again, really messing things up here. I really gotta edit things out, because I really don't have the time to go and edit things. Really don't have time to edit things. Can't really edit that out. Anyways, so my suggestion to you, Guardian Mine, is because the camera is literally just a visually disorienting mechanic, the best thing you can do in Destiny is reduce the amount of time it takes for you to aim. That's about it. Get to your target as fast as possible. Get used to your gun. Get used to predicting things. Get your, I guess, cognitive hypercone as tight and nice as possible so you can perceive as much as possible in game, etc., 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 etc. That would be my advice to you. Be confident with your shots. Get to your target as fast as possible and kind of brush onto target, because flinch, the faster you go, the less deflection will have happened. So say you hit in this amount of time, this is the amount of deflection that will have occurred. If you hit in, say, this amount of time, this much deflection will have occurred. Again, tightening your hypercones here. And hopefully Drewsky gets a hold of this and can start memeing about hypercones. That'd be kind of dope. If not, then this can kind of sit in the background. Now, my final thought that isn't advice or like whatever is kind of, I guess, just me sighing with, I guess, disappointment. This is not helpful. I'm just going to say it right now. These kind of videos are not helpful. OMG's gunplay, as I've described in a ridiculously long amount of time, is not something that's describable by standing still and shooting at targets. If you want to come up with solutions, you gotta say things better than Flinch is fake. I would not have, like, I guess there is some good that comes out of it, because I was actually motivated to make this video because of this video right here. It's just really, really disappointing that people like there are problems with Destiny. There are problems with the sandbox, like lots of problems with the sandbox and gunplay. And if you've seen my Reddit threads or you follow me at all, which you probably don't, you'll know that I complain a lot about this game. But this is not how you do it. Plain and simple. This is just not how you do it. I say Fallout Plays did a video like this better. He was more inquisitive and was wondering why it worked like that. And that is more how you should approach the game if you're trying to like be like, oh hey, this phenomenon exists, instead of just being like Flinch is fake. I'm sorry I'm really throwing band wipe under the bus, but this is really kind of a shitty thing to do. Like, really is, because somebody in the engine like probably like went through all the steps that I was thinking of, like when I went through that physics MS Paint thing. They might not have gone into like depths of like what that means for like players or whatnot, but basically like somebody made these conscious decisions, and it has made like the sum total of all of Destiny's gunplay has made it one of the best games to shoot guns in probably a very long time, at least since Halo. Like, Bungie is like really good at gunplay, so like questioning the fundamental gunplay mechanics of this game is just plain, I'm just gonna say, it's plain stupid. Absolutely plain stupid. And yeah, I guess the TLDR is, again, the reticle does move. Flinch isn't fake. And in fact, there's more to it than, there's actually more Flinch, there's more to Flinch in this game than pretty much any other game. Anyways, yeah, so don't critique the gunplay in this game. Go to the gameplay, and the standing still with your right mouse button held or your left trigger held is like a completely different thing than critiquing the engine or Flinch, and there are solutions to that that can be added more to the gameplay end, encouraging people to play the game differently than simply changing the mechanics of the game like 5 years in. And again, I guess just be intellectually honest, because in the end, no matter how much of an asshole you are, if you're going to be an asshole, you have to be an intellectually honest asshole, and you have to really, really back up your shit. And as far as people know, I'm that asshole. My name is Prodigy. Thanks for watching this ridiculously long video if you made it. If you didn't make it, then that's okay, because people don't like watching really long videos, and I understand that. People don't have time. I didn't have time to make this. Anyways, Prodigy out.